Today is Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And the psukim that we're going to read today, or study today, actually took place in the month of Shvat. At least that's where it began. On the 15th day of Shvat, which we call Tu B'Shvat, or Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Ilanot, this is the day that Moshe Rabbeinu began to warn the Egyptians about the impending plague of darkness. The first part of the second reading speaks about the grasshoppers, and then from there, in the 10th chapter of Sefer Shmos, of the book of Exodus, we speak about the result, or the end. There were no locusts left over, because locusts were a delicacy, and God wasn't enriching the Egyptian economy. So that all gets dumped into the Red Sea, and the Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he does not send forth the Jewish people. Pasuk Chafalef, Vayemer Hashem al Moshe. God says to Moshe, Netei Yodcha al Hashamayim. This is 3 weeks after the initial warnings began. This is on the 8th day of Adar. God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, raise your hand over the heavens. Vayi Cheshech al Haaretz, and it will be darkness upon the earth, on Eretz Mitzrayim. Vayomesh Cheshech. So Cheshech actualized. So Rashi talks about this business of Vayomesh. What does it mean Vayomesh Cheshech? It doesn't say Vayachshech. It doesn't say it got dark. It says Vayomesh. Rashi says that Vayomesh comes to the terminology Emesh, which is like the forenight or night before. So it's a terminology of darkness. But it doesn't really explain the word Vayomesh. So Rashi ultimately says it refers to a double kind of darkness, a palpable, a thick darkness. The Sepharno speaks about the notion that darkness as we know it was removed, which is darkness as we know it is basically the absence of light. Instead, says the Sepharno, an atmosphere which did not allow light to exist, which swallowed light. He said this is something which had never been seen before, never been seen on planet Earth. So that's the kind of darkness that we speak about over here. He says it's an avir bilti muchan lekabel ha'er. It's an atmosphere, it's a density that's not capable of conducting photons. L'roiv avir, because it's so dense. You ask me, it sounds like the Sepharno is describing negative matter, dark matter, like a black hole. That's what it sounds like to me. At any rate, that's the story of the darkness, and the darkness happened. So that's what was supposed to happen. And what happened? Vayet Moshe es yadei. Moshe did raise his hand, ala shamayim, over the heavens. Vayihi choshech afela. And then there was this darkness, but not just darkness, afela. This dense darkness, this palpable darkness. B'chol eretz Mitzrayim, the entirety of the land of Egypt. And this went on for shleishes yomim. It went on for 3 days. The Torah now describes the details and the contours of this darkness. V'leiro ishes achiv. Nobody saw, nobody could see his peer, nobody could see his fellow. V'leikamu ish mitachtov. And a person couldn't even stand up, he couldn't move. Shleishes yomim, for 3 days. V'lechol bnei Yisrael, but for the children of Israel, haya or b'moshvaisam. There was light in their place of dwelling. So let's take a look at Rashi here. How long was the Makkah of Choshech? Was it 3 days or was it 6 days? We seem to have the Torah describing 2 different events over here. An event where they couldn't see and an event where they couldn't move. So Rashi clarifies and explains for us as follows. He says Choshech shel oifel. This was in absolute darkness. And this absolute total darkness meant that you couldn't see anything. It totally ruled out the possibility of vision. Shaleiro ish es achiv, nobody could see the other. Oisan shaleishes yomim, those 3 days. Now afterwards, it says that there was leikamu ish mitachtov. It says you couldn't move because of the darkness. First it says they couldn't see, then it says they couldn't move. So the question is there a difference between one and the other? And if there isn't, why would the Torah repeat itself? And not seeing is one thing, not moving is an entirely different matter. So Rashi tells us that the first 3 days, those first 3 days they couldn't see. The darkness ruled out the possibility of vision. And then, after that, then there was another 3 days, besides the first 3 days. And in these 3 days, the second 3 days, there was chayshech that was muchpal. There was a double measure of chayshech. And this measure of chayshech was so intense, so profound. Alzeh shalekamu ish mitachtav. This was so much more than the first darkness, which ruled the possibility of light and vision, that they couldn't even move. It was literally so palpable, it froze them in their places. Yeshiv en yochalamid. If you were in a sitting position when this darkness hit, you couldn't stand. Ve'oimed, and if you were standing, en yochaleshiv, you couldn't sit. So essentially we know that every one of the makos lasted for a week. That's the rule. Moshe Rabbeinu would warn about it for 3 weeks, and then the makkah itself lasted for a week. And here, we only have this business of 3 days and then 3 days. So it's only 6 days. So where's the week? So actually, the Medrash Rabbah says something very interesting. That on the Reed Sea, when the Jewish people were camped the night before, and then there was this cloud that came and separated between Am Yisrael and between the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians who were pursuing them. So at that point it says that it was very dense, it was very thick, and they couldn't see anything. And the Medrash Rabbah says that was the 7th day of Cheshach. So there was actually 7 units. It was actually dark in 7 days. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu completed that darkness then. As it says, Vayhi ha'onon v'ha'cheshach, that there was this cloud and this darkness. That speaks about Mitzrayim. And then there was Vayored es halayla. The same cloud illuminated for the Jewish people. So let's even say that we're speaking here about dark matter. So if it's dark matter, it has to destroy existence. It can't just take away light. Light is the least of the things that dark matter would swallow up, right? But here, it only swallowed up light. It disabled them from having movement eventually in the last 3 days. But everybody was still alive. I don't think you could be alive if you're living in a black hole. I think it swallows you up. And then most miraculous of all is the fact that the Jewish people were doing just fine. Everybody else couldn't move, but they were moving about freely, and there was light in their area, where they lived. So that's what really all Rashi gives us at this point. So now we know that the darkness, even though it speaks about 3 days, is actually 3 days twice. So it was 6 days, and the Medrash gives us this idea that it gets the 7th day shows up at the end of what we call the holiday of Pesach, on the 7th day of Pesach, where the Jewish people were at the Reed Sea. Now Rashi very interestingly asks a proverbial question. V'loma hevi aleihem chayshach. On the level of Pshuta Shal Mikra, why was the chayshach brought? And specifically, why would the chayshach happen in 2 stages? First, there was a chayshach of darkness where they couldn't see anything, and then there was a chayshach where they couldn't move at all. What's the difference between the two, and why was that necessary? So, like in the Sfarim of Drush, there are many different reasons as to why chayshach might have come to the Mitzrayim. For example, we have the Me'en Ganim who says that the Egyptians darkened the lives of the Jewish people. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you darkened the life of my children, I'll show you what darkness means. So that's more like a figurative concept. The Sifsikoinim says that one of the things that the Egyptians would make the Jewish people do when it was dark at night, they were afraid, going into the unknown, they would make a Jew carry a lantern in front of him. And he didn't know where he was going. And this way they would have their area. They made the Jew illuminate his darkness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you send him into the darkness, now I'll send you into the darkness. And we have in the Klei Chemda, it says that the children of Israel, when they were woken, or when they would make them rise for the work detail, it would be when it was dark outside. And then they would torment them and beat them and work them all day. And then at night they come home and it was dark outside. And they never even saw daylight. I guess, at least during the winter. So at any rate, these are different reasons in Drush as to why HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the punishment of and the Makkah of darkness, the plague of darkness. But Rashi speaks here from a level of Pshuta Shal Mikra, and he says, why the Chayshach? And why in this sense? And he says the following. Shahayu b'Yisrael ba'iseh hadar rishayim. There were amongst the children of Israel, amongst Israel at this time, wicked people. And these wicked people were like kapos. They were close to the Egyptians. They were able to benefit. Was no suffering for them. And those Egyptians, those Hebrews didn't want to leave. They liked their position. They liked their power. said, we'll stay right here. We can torment our brothers and sisters. This is good. And they said, if we leave, we become like everybody else. We lose our advantage. And what happened was, they died during these 3 days of darkness. And why did they die during the days of darkness? In order, so then the Egyptians shouldn't see their downfall. Because then they would say, you think just we're suffering now? The Jews are suffering just as badly. They're suffering even worse. Look how they're dropping like flies. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't have two Jewish people. A Jewish people who go and get the Torah, and a Jewish people who stay behind the Mitzrayim. That's a recipe for disaster. It will never work. So the people had a choice to make. You can be part of this. You're a descendant of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Hop on the bandwagon and join Am Yisrael. You won't listen to Moshe. You won't come along. Well, then here in Egypt you shall remain. And there they did. Incredibly, they discovered, the archaeologists now have discovered, they don't talk about it because it doesn't fit the narrative of science, but there is a discovery of an area of Mitzrayim where the people that live there, they're able to see, have different genetics. They're not North Africans, they're Middle Easterns. They can actually see. They're actually able to tell. And in the middle, there's many compelling things they found in this settlement. One of the things they found there is 12 large mausoleums, which would be the Shvatim. And weirdly enough, they're all empty. Of course they are. The Jewish people took the bones of the Shvatim with them. One of them is larger than the others. Kind of makes sense. It might be Yosef or something like that. But they're all empty. All 12 of them are empty. And they said they also found these enormous pits, enormous holes, where it seems that people were buried in great haste. The people are buried in a tangle. The bodies are buried in a tangle. It seems that they were a rush against time. Here it is. This is exactly what happened. Because it was dark, and the Jewish people had to deal with their dead. So what did they do? There were mass graves, and they did it under duress, because they didn't know when the darkness is going to lift. So that's the first three. That's the first few days. They were busy, unfortunately, burying the dead the first few days. What about the next few days? So Rashi says, V'oid, and another, or perhaps this could be another reason for Makas Cheshach, or perhaps this is about the second days are about. Shechipsu Yisrael, that the Jewish people, when they were finished burying the dead, then they went off to check out the homes of their enemies. V'ro es kleihem, they saw all of their valuables, all of their residuals. Ucheshiyatsu, and when it came time to leave Mitzrayim, and they were coming to borrow, as Moshe Rabbeinu instructed them, go and borrow kli chesed v'kli zov, beautiful items made of gold and silver. So the Egyptians said, we don't have anything. What are you talking about? So the Israelite, the Hebrew says to the Egyptian, really? You don't have anything? I myself saw this vessel. I saw it. Beveischa, in your house. In case you forgot where it is, I'll tell you exactly where it is. And the Egyptian would say, yes, of course, right, I forgot all about that. And this way, the Jewish people identified the wealth, the residuals, and they went after them. Okay, so now we have a little bit of an understanding and appreciation of what happened, what went down during the Makkah of Cheshach. Now I'm going to direct you to the Virei Chumash. We're going to go to Siman Tes, and we're going to find out something fascinating. This business of the Jewish people searching through the homes of the Egyptian taskmasters so that they become aware of their wealth and residuals, so that when the time would come to leave Mitzrayim and they had to borrow, they would be able to go and get because they knew exactly what was there. This business shows up, page Kuf Pei. This shows up in the Medrash also. I mean, Rashi gets it from somewhere. But there's a big difference between the way this interpretation is found in the Medrash Rabbah and between the way Rashi frames it here. Shom, in the Medrash, there's a Heisafa, there's an addition. The Medrash says, and this is the meaning of the last verse of the Aliyah, that it says, Ulachol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'meshvaisam, that the Jewish people had light, says the Medrash. Be'eretz Goshen lo nemar, it doesn't say there was light in the land of Goshen. That's what it said earlier when it spoke about the distinction between the wild animals or not. Right? It said Goshen was set aside. Here it doesn't say there was light in Goshen. Here it says, in their dwellings. And that means, says the Medrash, Shekal Makim Shahaya Yehudi Nichnas, that any place a Jew entered, Haya Ur Nichnas, light would enter with him. But only for him. Umiyah meir lay, and it would illuminate it for him. Ma shebechavies ubetevis umatmarnias, that which was in containers, that which was locked away, that which was squirreled or hidden away. So they had this X-ray vision. They had this miraculous light that illuminated things for them. Nothing could be hidden. And that's the meaning of Hayar. So not only did they were able to see in a normal fashion, they had miraculous vision. They had a miraculous light that accompanied them and allowed them to see things which otherwise would have been impossible to see. Now Rashi says nothing like this. He just says it was light. They didn't suffer from darkness. Because they didn't suffer, they could rummage through and find things. It wasn't under lock and key. They didn't expect to be invaded. They didn't expect any home invasion, any burglars. They kept it wherever they kept it. So the Jewish people rummaged through all the areas. They went to the closets, they went to the storage areas, and they found out exactly what was there. Medivri Rashi, it does not seem that there was any kind of miyuchad v'nisi, any kind of special miraculous light. Rather, it says, how did they see? How did they see? Well, how does anybody see? Regularly. It's light, they see. In other words, there was no miraculous darkness. It was the absence of a miracle in darkness. It wasn't a special miracle of light. The darkness didn't come for them. So, minus the darkness, they could see. And that's why Rashi says, and he uses a very interesting word here. He says, shechipsu. They rummaged, they searched. Rummaging and searching means that it wasn't readily available or visible. They had to look for it. They looked through things. They were busy ruffling through all the different areas until they found these things. And only after chipsu, only after they rummaged and searched, then ra'u es keleim. In other words, that is to say, shahoya aleim lechapes. They had to seek out in order to find these residuals, in order to find these artifacts. Nowhere in Rashi does it say there was this special light that lit up the hidden areas, the dark corners. In order for them to be able to rummage through the homes of the Egyptians with no problem, the Egyptians had to be in the dark. And they were in the dark. So much in the dark they couldn't move. So the Israelite walked in and he saw the Egyptian frozen in place. Right? So he could move around freely. The Egyptian is like this, he's frozen. The Hebrew sees he's frozen, he has light, and he goes and does whatever he wants. The Egyptian can't see anything, he can't even move. He may have heard people walking through the house, he may have wondered what's going on, he couldn't do anything about it. So this becomes the question then. Why is it that the Medrash would talk about this miraculous light, and yet here Rashi doesn't want to talk about it? It doesn't really help, like you're not minimizing miracles here. You're talking about miracles anyway. It's not like Rashi would say, we have to understand this in a natural manner. We shouldn't look for miracles. This is all miracles. We don't buy into the idea that the makkos are a natural phenomenon, that it just happened to be there was an eclipse, a solar eclipse that lasted for 6 days or kind of narishkat like that. No, this is a miracle. We say it's a miracle. Moshe Rabbeinu raised his hand over the heaven and he brought the darkness. It's a miracle. So if it's a miracle, why be sparing? Why are you holding back? Why is Rashi afraid to introduce this idea of the Medrash? He doesn't make this up himself. This is a Midrashic idea. It comes from a higher place. So share it. It makes the story more interesting. There's got to be a reason, something that prevents Rashi from saying this. He wants to give you the words of the Medrash. He wants you to know that the Jewish people utilized this special time. In fact, that's why it was there. It was designated for this exact purpose. And yet, he doesn't want to tell you about this miraculous light. So the Rebbe suggests that the reason that Rashi won't talk about this light, but the Medrash does, is because this is really about the nature of a mitzvah. It's known, there's this known idea, that one has to make every effort to fulfill the mitzvahs of the Almighty, b'derech hateva, by using the means of nature. V'loi al yedei nes, but not through a miracle. V'yaseda mizu. Furthermore, gam ha'achana mitzvah, even the preparation for a mitzvah, tzricha lihiyes b'derech hateva. So there's this fascinating story of the Alter Rebbe being incarcerated in the Peter Paul Fortress, and he's taken, there's a little ferry there. It's like Billy Bishop Airport in Toronto. A little ferry. It's not an electronic ferry, so it takes a little longer. Somebody's got to row the boat. And the Alter Rebbe was being taken back and forth from the prison to what they call the, I guess it would be like a State Department. I think it's called Tiny Soviet. I think that's the name of the building. It's next to the Winter Palace. And that was the offices of the High Tribunal. And they would bring the Alter Rebbe there. They didn't come to prison. Bring him there to interrogate him. And he was brought back and forth numerous times. So on one occasion, the Alter Rebbe had been taken into prison in the month of Tishrei. And now it's the month of Cheshvan. And he didn't have a chance to say Kiddush Levana. He wanted to say Kiddush Levana. Maybe it happened in Kislev, either in Cheshvan or in Kislev. So he asks the ferryman to stop the boat, because you're not supposed to recite Kiddush Levana when you're in a state of movement. The guy said, absolutely not. Are you kidding with me? I'm not stopping any boats. So the boat suddenly stops. And the guy's rowing and rowing, doesn't move. The Alter Rebbe says, you're going to stop for me? The guy realized this is not a joke. He's dealing with a holy man. He said, yes. The boat starts moving again. The fellow stops. And then Alter Rebbe was Mekadosh Levana. So the story goes that this person asked Alter Rebbe for a bracha, and Alter Rebbe wrote him up some kind of note, and the family had this note in a golden frame, and it was seen by Chassidim later, and that's how the story got out. So here's the question that the Frierdiker Rebbe asked. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, 1 second. If the Alter Rebbe doesn't want to use miraculous means, he says, if the Alter Rebbe can make the boat stop miraculously, so what did he ask the guy for? Just make it stop. And furthermore, after the Alter Rebbe made it stop, he asked him again. And then the guy agreed, and then he was Mekadosh Levana. What's the point? And the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, this is because a mitzvah has to be fulfilled using nature. So the Alter Rebbe can use miraculous means to get to prepare for the mitzvah. That's like an extra assist. You can use it as an extra assist, but for the actual mitzvah, you have to use nature. And otherwise it doesn't work. So it's the same idea here. If we have a mitzvah to borrow things from the Egyptians, in order to fulfill that mitzvah, that commandment from God, we have to make sure that we know what we're asking for, because the Egyptians were not exactly so forthcoming. So then we had to make the preparations for the mitzvah. What was the preparations? You got to check out the goods. You got to find out what's there. In order for us to find out what's there, we had to be sure that we actually were doing this in natural means. If we had miraculous light, if we saw everything without rummaging, without looking for it, we didn't fulfill the mitzvah. And then the mitzvah is not fulfilled appropriately. The mitzvah needs to be filled in what's called derech tivis. Shekein hadavar hayo hachana lekiyam tzivish lakadosh baruch hu. This was all a preparation to fulfill the commandment of God. V'yishalo ish me'esrei eo v'isha me'esrei usa kli chesed v'kli zav. The man will ask his neighbor, the woman will ask her friend, or friend, whatever, Egyptian neighbor, they'll say, give us your gold and silver. So if that's the case, why is the Medrash so free? Why is the Medrash happy to introduce this light? So the Rebbe says there's two possible reasons. Number one, according to the Medrash, it could be, the Medrash's view is that this business of fulfilling mitzvah in natural means only begins after Matan Torah. This is before Matan Torah. Now, we don't see that distinction anywhere, but that could be. Another thing could be is that the Medrash doesn't understand this business of asking for the gold and silver as a mitzvah, like Ibn Ezra says it's a mitzvah which we can't understand. Why would God tell us to do something dishonest? We don't understand it, he says. But he says it's not to be seen. The Medrash doesn't see it as a mitzvah. The Medrash sees it as a payment. We worked for 210 years. This is what's rightfully due to us. So he says in that case it's not a mitzvah. In that case we're just getting what's supposed to be coming our way. And if so, why do you have to make effort for? So that's where Hashem made the miraculous eye. But in Pshuta Shal Mikra, when you learn the verse literally, it is a mitzvah, and the mitzvah has to be done in natural means. So sometimes we will avoid the light, and we will look for the darkness, because the darkness, representing the nature that Hashem created, which conceals the light of God, is what's absolutely necessary as the ingredient to make the mitzvah most meaningful. You have to work with the material, within the frames of the material, in order to accomplish the mitzvah as it should be. And hopefully by us doing our part, utilizing the material reality, this accelerates the process of the transformation of materiality, and that, my dear friends, of course, is the coming of Mashiach. May it happen speedily and in our days. Amen.